Silas Calloway hadn't touched a woman's hand in 3 years. Not since he'd buried his wife beneath the elm tree and stopped believing kindness had any use left in the world. But that morning, when he knelt in the dirt of Judge Emmett Crane's horse barn and saw the girl tied to the post, wrists raw, lips cracked, eyes burning with a fury that hadn't been broken yet, he reached for her hands before he reached for his gun. And that single choice cost him everything he had left, and gave him back everything he'd lost. If this story finds you tonight, stay with me till the end. Subscribe, follow along, and drop a comment telling me which city you're watching from. I want to see just how far this story travels. The heat came early that summer in Copper Bluff, Montana territory. The kind of heat that cracked the earth before breakfast and turned every breath into something you had to earn. Silas Calloway rode into town at first light, the way he always did. Alone, unhurried, sitting tall on a bay gelding that moved like it already knew the way. He wore his wife's hat. Not a woman's hat exactly, just a wide-brimmed thing she'd bought him at a trade post in Billings the year before she died. He wore it every day. Not for shade, for her. He hadn't spoken to anyone in town for 11 days. That wasn't unusual. Silas didn't avoid people. He just didn't seek them out. 3 years of grief had carved the conversation out of him the way river water carves stone. Slowly, completely, without apology. He was here for a horse. A draft horse, broad-shouldered, strong enough to pull timber from the North Ridge before autumn. Judge Emmett Crane had one for sale. A Belgian, supposedly. 16 hands. Fair price. Silas didn't like Crane. Nobody did, exactly. But everybody needed him. Crane owned the land office, the courthouse, half the storefronts on Main Street, and enough debt notes to keep every rancher in the territory polite. He was the kind of man who smiled when he had you cornered and called it hospitality. But a horse was a horse, and Silas needed one. He tied his gelding outside Crane's barn and stepped through the wide door. Inside, the air was thick. Hay dust, manure, old leather, the sour tang of summer sweat baked into timber. Flies droned against the light that came through the slats in long gold bars. He moved down the center aisle, boots slow on packed dirt. Stalls on either side. A roan mare here, a paint there. Nothing Belgian, nothing worth the ride. Then he heard it. Not a horse sound, not hooves, not breathing through wide nostrils, not the shift of weight on straw. This was smaller, tighter, a human breath, ragged and shallow, the way breathing sounds when it hurts to do it. Silas stopped. He didn't call out, didn't rush, just turned his head toward the last stall on the left, where the light didn't reach. He stepped closer, slow and quiet, the way a man moves when he already knows what he's about to find won't be good. Behind a wall of stacked hay bales, crumpled against the backboards like something discarded, was a woman. Young, maybe 23, maybe 25, hard to tell under the damage. Her wrists were lashed to a post with braided horse rope, pulled tight enough to dig grooves into the skin. Her dress was torn at the collar, faded cotton, stiff with dried sweat and dirt. No shoes. Her feet were blistered, ankles scabbed where rope had been before, and her face... Her face told a story he didn't need to hear out loud. One eye swollen half shut. A bruise across her jaw, fading green at the edges, which meant it wasn't new. Lips cracked, hair matted. But her back was straight as a fence post, and her one good eye, it locked onto his with something that wasn't fear. It was rage. She didn't scream, didn't beg, didn't cry. She just looked at him the way a trapped animal looks at anything that moves. measuring, calculating, deciding if this was another threat or just the next one. Silas crouched. She flinched, hard. Her whole body jerked against the rope. He raised both hands, palms open. "I ain't here to hurt you." She said nothing. He reached for the knot at her wrists. She pulled back. "Easy," he said. "Not soft, just steady. I'm cutting you loose." He drew the knife from his belt, and her breath caught. He paused. Let her see it. Let her see him turn the blade toward the rope and not toward her. Then he cut. The rope fell away in 2 pieces. She pulled her wrist to her chest and held them there, trembling, not from cold, it was 90 degrees in that barn, but from something deeper, something that lived inside the bones. "Can you stand?" he asked. She didn't answer, just stared at him like she was trying to figure out the cost. "There ain't a cost," he said, as if he'd read her mind. Behind them, footsteps, the sharp click of heels on hard ground. Not boots, dress shoes, the kind no honest rancher wore. "Well now." The voice came smooth and cool, the way cream slides off a spoon. Judge Emmett Crane stepped into the barn like he owned the air inside it, which, technically, he did. He was tall, lean, silver-haired, clean-shaven. His coat was pressed. His collar was white. He looked like a man who'd never sweated a day in his life and considered that a virtue. He carried a cane he didn't need and a smile he used like a weapon. He didn't look at the woman, not once. "Silas Calloway," Crane said, tipping his head. "You're early. Horses in the east paddock. Fine animal. You'll be pleased." Silas didn't stand. He was still crouched beside the woman, the cut rope at his feet. "What is this?" Silas asked. Crane glanced down. His smile didn't waver. That's a matter of private business. She's tied to a post. She's in my care." Silas stood, slowly, the way a man stands when he wants you to see every inch of him rise. He was taller than Crane, broader. His bad shoulder sat lower than the other, but the rest of him was solid as the ground he stood on. "Care," Silas repeated. Crane clicked his tongue. "She came to me 3 weeks ago. Destitute. No family, no papers, no prospects. I gave her shelter, fed her, kept her out of trouble." He waved a hand, casual. "You know how these young women are. Impulsive, ungrateful. She tried to run. Stole from my pantry on the way out. I had to restrain her for her own safety." "For her own safety," Silas said. "That's right. You tied her to a post. In a horse stall. In July. Temporarily." The woman spoke. Just one word, cracked and dry as desert wood. "Liar." Crane's jaw tightened. Just a flicker, gone before most men would catch it. But Silas caught it. "She's confused," Crane said. "He does that." "She don't look confused." "Silas," Crane's voice shifted. Still smooth, but underneath, iron. "I've got signed papers. Her stepbrother, a man named Vernon Sheridan, transferred labor rights to me as payment for a debt. Legal and proper. Filed at my office. She belongs to this arrangement until the debt is cleared." "How much is the debt?" "That's between me and the contract." "How much?" Crane paused, studied Silas like a man deciding how much truth to spend. "More than a horse," he said quietly. "Now, do you want the Belgian, or don't you?" Silas looked at the woman. She was still on the ground, wrists pressed to her chest, watching both men with that one fierce eye. She hadn't asked for help, hadn't begged, hadn't done anything but call the man a liar and sit there like a coiled spring. He looked back at Crane. I don't want the horse." Crane blinked. "Pardon?" "I said I don't want the horse." Silas stepped back, extended his hand to the woman, not demanding, just there. She looked at his hand for a long time. Then she stood on her own, winced, steadied, stood. Crane's smile finally cracked. "You walk out of here with her, and you're taking on her debt. You understand that? I'll have the law at your door by sundown. Then I'll leave the door open for him. Silas, judge." Silas said it flat and final. "I've buried a wife. I've buried friends. I've carried things no man should carry, and I've never once asked this town for a thing. But I'm telling you right now, I ain't leaving a woman tied in a stall. Not today. Not any day. And if you got a problem with that, you know where I live." Silence. The kind that presses against walls. Crane looked at the woman. For the first time, he actually looked at her. His eyes narrowed. "You'll regret this, girl." She didn't answer, just turned and walked toward the barn door, barefoot, limping, head high. Silas followed. He didn't look back. Outside, the sun hit them like a wall. The town was already stirring, wagons creaking, doors opening, the smell of bread from Ruth Adler's shop down the street. A few faces turned, a few eyes lingered. Silas helped the woman up onto his wagon. She climbed without his help, then sat rigid on the bench, arms wrapped around herself despite the heat. He climbed up beside her, took the reins, clicked his tongue. The gelding moved. They didn't speak for the first mile. Dust rose behind them in a slow golden cloud. The road wound through dry grass and fence lines, and the occasional cluster of cottonwoods offering shade neither of them reached for. Finally, without turning her head, she said, "You shouldn't have done that." "Probably not." "He'll come after you." "Probably will." "I ain't worth the trouble." Silas glanced at her. Her jaw was clenched. Her hands were in her lap, wrists angry red. She was staring straight ahead, like the road itself owed her something. "What's your name?" he asked. A long pause. Flies buzzed around the horse's ears. "Nell," she said. "Nell Sheridan." "Silas Calloway." "I know who you are." She paused. "Everybody knows the man who don't talk." He almost smiled. Almost. "Nell Sheridan," he repeated, testing the name. "You got anywhere to go?" She didn't answer right away. She looked at her bare feet, at the blisters, at the road stretching out ahead, baked and cracked and endless. "No," she said. He nodded. That was enough. Back in town, word moved faster than the wagon. By the time Silas had crossed the creek bridge, 3 people had already told 4 others. By noon, the whole of Copper Bluff knew. At the general store, Henry Potts leaned across the counter and said to whoever was listening, "Calloway walked out of Crane's barn with some girl. Barefoot. Beat up. Didn't buy the horse." At the post office, Mrs. Leary clucked her tongue. "A man living alone with a strange woman. No ring, no papers, no family. You know what that means." At the saloon, Deputy Walt Teague poured himself a whiskey he hadn't paid for and said, "Crane ain't gonna let this sit." And he was right. At the ranch, Silas pulled the wagon up to the porch. The cabin sat small and sturdy against the hill. Log walls, tin roof, a chimney that leaned slightly east. Wild sage grew along the fence. The barn stood 50 yards out, sun-bleached and patient. He climbed down. Nell didn't move. "You can come inside," he said. She looked at the cabin like it might bite her. "Why?" "Because it's hot and you need water." She searched his face for something. A lie, a motive, a debt she'd owe later. She didn't find it. She climbed down. Inside, the cabin was simple. One room for living, one for sleeping, a kitchen barely wider than a closet, a fireplace that wouldn't be needed for months, a table with 2 chairs, though only one had been used in years. A woman's shawl still hung by the window, faded lavender, untouched. Silas filled a cup from the water barrel and set it on the table. Then he cut bread, sliced a chunk of hard cheese, set it beside the cup. Nell stood by the door, didn't sit, didn't touch anything. "I ain't staying," she said. "Didn't ask you to." "I'm saying it so you know." "I know." She looked at the bread. Her stomach made a sound that betrayed her. "Eat," he said. "Then do what you want." He walked outside, sat on the porch step, and pulled out a piece of leather he'd been mending for a bridle. He worked it with his hands, the good one and the weak one together, and he didn't go back inside. When he finally did, an hour later, maybe more, the bread was gone. The cheese was gone. The cup was empty. Nell was sitting on the floor in the corner, knees drawn up, arms wrapped tight. She wasn't asleep. Her eyes were open, fixed on the door, watching it like it might open any second and let the world back in. Silas set a folded blanket on the chair nearest to her. Didn't hand it to her, just set it down. "There's a bolt on the bedroom door," he said. "From the inside. You can use the room. I'll sleep out here." She looked at the blanket, at him, at the bedroom door. "Why are you doing this?" she asked. Her voice cracked in the middle. Silas leaned against the doorframe. "Because 3 years ago, I was the one sitting on the floor, and nobody came." He walked outside and closed the door behind him. Nell sat there a long time, listening to the silence. It was a different kind of silence than the barn. That silence had been a cage. This one was just empty, waiting to be filled. She reached for the blanket, pressed it against her face. It smelled like cedar and old soap, and something she couldn't name but recognized anyway. Safety, maybe. Or the memory of it. She didn't cry, not yet. But her hands shook, and when she finally stood and walked into the bedroom and slid the bolt shut from the inside, she stood there with her back against the door and breathed. Just breathed. Outside, Silas sat on the porch and watched the sun go down over the ridge, painting the sky in shades of copper and blood. Somewhere in town, Judge Emmett Crane was reading contracts. Somewhere, Deputy Teague was polishing his badge. Somewhere, the town of Copper Bluff was already deciding what kind of story this was going to be. But here, in the quiet, a woman he didn't know was sleeping behind a locked door in his house. And for the first time in 3 years, the cabin didn't feel empty. It felt like the beginning of something he didn't have a name for yet. Something that scared him more than grief ever had. She was gone before dawn. Silas found the bedroom door open, the blanket folded on the bed, the bolt still warm from her hand. He stood there for a moment, looking at the crease she'd left in the pillow, then walked to the porch. Nell was sitting on the bottom step, barefoot, knees pulled to her chest, staring at the road like she was doing math in her head. Distance, time, how far she could get before someone came looking. He didn't ask if she was leaving. He just set a cup of coffee beside her on the step and went to the barn to feed the gelding. When he came back, the cup was empty. She was still there. "I need to tell you something," she said without turning around. He sat on the top step behind her, waited. "Crane didn't find me sneaking through his stables. That's what he tells people, but it ain't what happened." Her voice was flat, rehearsed, like she'd been practicing it in her head all night. "My stepbrother Vernon owed him money. A lot of it. Gambling debts mostly. Vernon couldn't pay, so he signed a paper. Gave Crane rights to my labor until the debt cleared. How much? $200. Silas exhaled through his nose. A man could buy a house for that. Vernon didn't even tell me, Nell continued. Crane's men came to the boarding house where I was working in Helena. 3 of them. Put me in a wagon and drove me here. Told me I'd be cooking and cleaning for the judge. That's what they said. Cooking and cleaning. She stopped. Silas didn't push. First week, that's what it was. I scrubbed his floors, washed his shirts, cooked his meals. He was polite about it, always polite. Said please and thank you like I was a guest instead of a prisoner. Her jaw tightened. Then one night, he came to the room where I slept. Didn't knock. Just stood there in the doorway watching me. Didn't say a word. Just watched. Her hands curled into fists on her knees. I told him to get out. He smiled and said, "This is my house, girl. Every room in it belongs to me, including the one you're in." Silas felt something shift inside his chest, something heavy settling into place. Did he? No, she cut him off fast. Not that. Not yet. But he would have. I could feel it coming the way you feel a storm before the sky turns. So I ran, middle of the night, got 3 miles before his men caught me. After that, the stall. How long? 11 days. Silas closed his eyes. 11 days tied to a post in a horse stall in Montana summer heat. No shoes, no shade. Fed when they remembered. Watered like livestock. He told the town I was a thief, she said. Said I stole from him and he was holding me for the deputy. Nobody questioned it. Nobody came to look. I came. She turned then, looked at him over her shoulder. You came to buy a horse. I did. So what now? He met her gaze. Now you drink your coffee, and I fix the fence on the north side. After that, I don't know. Same as yesterday. That ain't an answer. It's the only one I got. She stared at him for a long moment. Then she turned back to the road. I keep waiting for you to tell me what you want. I want to fix my fence. From me. What do you want from me? Nothing. Men always want something. I ain't arguing that. So? Silas stood up. His bad shoulder popped when he moved. I want you to stop sleeping on the floor when there's a bed. I want you to eat when there's food. And I want you to stop looking at that road like it's the only door in the room. That's it. That's what I want. She didn't answer. He didn't wait for one. He picked up his tools and walked to the north pasture. When he came back 4 hours later, hands blistered, shirt soaked through, she'd swept the cabin floor, boiled water, hung his spare shirt on the line to dry. She was sitting at the table with a piece of bread, eating slow, deliberate, like she was teaching herself to stay. He washed his hands in the basin, sat across from her. There's a woman in town, he said. Ruth Adler. Runs the sewing shop. She's fair. She'd give you work if you asked. Nell stopped chewing. I ain't going into town. You will, eventually. Not with people looking at me like I'm something Crane threw out. They'll look at you however they want. That's their business. What you do about it is yours. She set the bread down. You talk like a man who's never been looked at wrong. I talk like a man who stopped caring when they did. Something flickered in her face. Not quite a smile. Maybe the place where a smile would go if she ever let one in. That afternoon, a rider came. Silas heard the hooves before he saw the dust. He stepped out of the barn with the hammer still in his hand and watched Tom Birch come trotting up the drive on a chestnut mare that was too fine for a ranch hand's pay. Tom was 19, sun-brown, skinny as a whip. He'd worked for Silas 2 seasons, mending fence, moving cattle, doing the work that needed doing without being told. Good kid. Quiet, but he rode up fast today, and his face carried something Silas didn't like. "Mr. Calloway." Tom pulled up short, didn't dismount. "I got something to tell you, and you ain't gonna like it." "Then say it." Tom glanced toward the cabin. Nell was standing in the doorway, half hidden behind the frame. "Judge Crane's been talking," Tom said. "All morning. He's at the saloon right now buying drinks, shaking hands, telling everyone you kidnapped that girl." "I didn't kidnap anyone." "I know that. But he's saying you took her by force, says she's under legal contract and you stole property. He's got Deputy Teague writing it up." Silas set the hammer down on the fence post. "Teague works for Crane. Everybody knows that." "Everybody knows it, and nobody says it. That's the problem." Tom shifted in his saddle. "He's also saying, and I'm sorry, sir, but he's saying that you're keeping her here for personal reasons." Nell stepped out of the doorway. Tom looked at her and looked away fast, like he'd been caught staring at something he shouldn't. "What kind of personal reasons?" Nell asked. Her voice was sharp enough to cut rope. Tom's ears went red. "Ma'am, I don't say it. He's telling people that Mr. Calloway that you two are—" "I understand." She turned to Silas. Her face was stone. "This is what I meant. I'll go." "No." "Silas, I said no. You don't get to decide that, and Crane don't get to decide it either." He picked up the hammer again. "Tom, you ride back to town. You find Ruth Adler. You tell her I'm coming in tomorrow morning, and I'd appreciate a word." Tom nodded, then hesitated. "Mr. Calloway, there's one more thing." "What?" "Crane's offering a reward. $20 to anyone who brings the girl back." The air between them went tight. Nell's hand gripped the doorframe. Silas looked at Tom, really looked at him, and saw the boy flinch. "You thinking about collecting?" Silas asked. No accusation in it, just the question. Tom's jaw set. "No, sir, I am not." "Then ride." Tom rode. Nell was shaking when she came back inside. Not the kind of shaking you could see from the outside. The kind that lives under the skin, in the tendons, in the place where the body stores every time it's been grabbed, held down, carried off. She sat at the table and pressed her palms flat against the wood. $20, she whispered. "That's what I'm worth to him." "That's what he's willing to pay to own you. There's a difference." "Is there?" "You know there is." She pressed her palms harder, like she was trying to push the table through the floor. "I had a life before this. I was working at a boarding house in Helena. I could read. My father taught me. I kept a journal. I wrote down everything. Every day, every meal, every conversation. I had proof that I existed." "Where's the journal now?" Her mouth tightened. "Crane took it. When his men brought me here, he took my satchel, my clothes, my comb, everything. Said I wouldn't need any of it." "The journal, he still got it?" "I don't know. He might have burned it. He burns things that don't serve him." Silas leaned against the counter. His mind was working, slow but steady, the way it always worked. "If that journal's got dates, got details about how you ended up here, about what Vernon did, what Crane did, that's more than a story. That's evidence." Nell looked up. "Evidence for what?" "For the day you stand in front of someone who ain't in Crane's pocket and tell the truth. Her eyes searched his face. You think that day's coming? I think you're the kind of woman who makes days like that come, whether the world's ready or not. She didn't respond, but something behind her eyes shifted. A door opening, maybe, or a fist unclenching. That night, she didn't sleep on the floor. She didn't sleep in the bed either. She sat at the table with a candle and a piece of paper Silas had given her, and she wrote. Not a journal. Those words were gone. New words. Dates, names, places. Everything she remembered. She wrote until the candle burned to a stub and the sky turned gray. When Silas woke on the porch, he'd taken to sleeping outside, giving her the run of the cabin. She was standing over him, paper in hand. I wrote it down, she said. All of it. From the day Vernon signed that paper to the morning you cut me loose. He sat up, took the pages, didn't read them, just held them. These are yours, he said, not mine. I know, but I need someone else to know they exist, in case something happens to me. Nothing's going to happen to you. You don't know that. She crouched beside him. Silas, I've been property before. In my stepbrother's house, in Crane's barn. Every time I thought I was safe, someone came and proved me wrong. I'm not being dark about it. I'm being honest. He looked at her. The bruise around her eye had faded to yellow. Her lip was healing. But her gaze, that hadn't changed. Still sharp, still measuring, still waiting for the next blow. I'll hold these, he said, and if something happens, I'll make sure every person in Montana Territory reads them. She nodded once, then stood. I'm going to town today. He raised an eyebrow. You said Ruth Adler would give me work. I'm going to ask. You don't have shoes. She looked at her feet, blistered, calloused, bruised. Silas went inside, came back with a pair of boots. They were old, cracked at the heel, laces knotted in 3 places. Women's boots, his wife's boots. The one she'd worn the last spring she was alive, walking through the wildflowers on the South Hill, laughing at nothing, alive in a way that made the whole valley feel small. He set them down on the porch boards. Nell stared at them. Those belonged to someone. They did. I can't take a dead woman's boots. She ain't using them, and she would have handed them to you herself. Nell picked them up, turned them over, ran her thumb along the stitching. Then she sat down and pulled them on. They fit. Not perfect, but close enough. Thank you, she said. First time she'd said it since the barn. Silas just tipped his hat and went to saddle the gelding. They rode into town together on the wagon. Nell sat straight on the bench, shoulders squared, chin up. She was wearing his flannel shirt, too big in the shoulders, tucked into her mended dress. The boots. Her hair pulled back with a strip of cloth. She didn't look rescued. She looked ready. Copper Bluff was already awake when they rolled down Main Street. Heads turned, curtains moved. A woman at the Mercantile pulled her child inside. 2 men on the porch of the saloon stopped talking and just watched. Nell felt every eye like a hand on her skin. But she didn't flinch, didn't look down. Silas pulled up outside Ruth Adler's shop, a small storefront with a painted sign that read, Adler's, Mending and Tailoring, in letters that had seen better days. Mel climbed down from the wagon, stood on the boardwalk, looked at the door. You coming in? She asked. No, this is yours. She nodded, pushed the door open. The bell above it rang thin and bright. Ruth Adler was behind the counter, spectacles low on her nose, silver hair wound tight. She looked up, studied Nell the way a tailor studies fabric. Not for beauty, but for strength. "You're the girl from Crane's barn," Ruth said. Not a question. "I'm the woman from nowhere who needs work." Ruth's eyebrow went up. "Can you sew?" "I can learn." "Can you show up every morning before I open and leave after I close?" "Yes." "Can you keep your mouth shut when the women in this town walk in here and say ugly things about you to my face?" Nell's jaw tightened. "I can keep my hands still. My mouth makes its own decisions." Ruth stared at her, a long, silent, measuring stare. Then the old woman reached beneath the counter and set a needle, thread, and a torn shirt on the surface. "Fix that sleeve. If the stitch holds, you start tomorrow." Nell sat down, took the needle. Her hands were steady. She worked quiet and fast, fingers moving like they remembered something her mind had tried to forget. When she finished, Ruth held the sleeve up to the light, turned it, pulled the stitch. It held. "Tomorrow," Ruth said, 6 o'clock. "Don't be late." Nell walked out into the sun. Silas was leaning against the wagon, arms crossed, watching the street. "She hire you?" he asked. "She gave me a needle and said, 'Don't be late.'" "That's Ruth's way of saying she likes you." "She didn't say she liked me." "She never does." They stood there a moment. The town moved around them. Wagons, voices, the clang of the blacksmith's hammer. But between Silas and Nell, there was a stillness that felt deliberate, chosen. Then she saw him, across the street, stepping out of the courthouse with a folder under his arm and a smile that could curdle milk. Judge Emmett Crane. He stopped when he saw her, tilted his head like a man admiring a painting he intended to buy. He didn't cross the street, didn't shout, just raised one hand, touched the brim of his hat, and nodded. A greeting, a warning, a promise. Nell's blood went cold. Her hands clenched at her sides. Every muscle in her body screamed at her to run, to climb into the wagon, to disappear down that road and never stop. But she didn't. She looked at Crane, held his gaze across the dust and noise of Main Street. And she didn't look away. He did. He turned and walked into the saloon, folder tucked under his arm, and the door swung shut behind him. Nell exhaled. Her hands were shaking again. She pressed them flat against her thighs and breathed until they stopped. "Get on the wagon," Silas said quietly. "Not yet." She walked down the boardwalk, past the mercantile, past the post office, past every window with a face behind it. She walked like a woman planting a flag with every step. Then she turned around, walked back to the wagon, climbed up, and sat down. "Now," she said. Silas took the reins. They didn't speak the whole way home, but when they pulled up to the cabin and Nell climbed down, she paused at the porch step, turned back. "Silas?" "Yeah?" "I ain't gonna run. Not from him. Not from this town. Not from whatever comes next." He looked at her, tipped his hat. "I know." She turned and walked inside. The door closed behind her, but this time she didn't slide the bolt. Inside, she sat at the table with the candle burning and the pages she'd written spread before her. She read them once, twice, 3 times. Then she folded them carefully, slid them into the pocket of the flannel shirt, and pressed her hand against her chest, where the paper crinkled against her heart. Outside, Silas stood by the fence and watched the stars come up one by one over the ridge. The gelding nickered softly in the barn. The crickets sang their idiot songs. And somewhere in town, a man with silver hair and a cane he didn't need was making plans. But here, in the dark, in the quiet, Silas felt something he hadn't felt in 3 years. Not hope exactly. Not yet. Something before hope. The ground it grows in. He pressed his palm against the fence post, the same one he'd set the day after his wife's funeral, pounding it into the earth like he was nailing down the last piece of his old life. It was still solid, still standing, and so was he. 3 days Nell worked at Ruth Adler's shop. 3 days she walked into town in borrowed boots, sat at the back table, stitched what was torn, and walked home before dark. 3 days she kept her head down, her mouth shut, and her hands busy. On the 4th day, the trouble walked through the door. Nell was hemming a skirt for Mrs. Leary, the same Mrs. Leary who'd told half the town Nell was a kept woman, when the bell above the door rang, and a voice she knew better than her own heartbeat filled the room. "Well, ain't this sweet?" Vernon Sheridan, her stepbrother, standing in Ruth Adler's doorway like he owned it, like he owned everything, like the world was a room, and he was the only man with a key. He was shorter than Nell remembered, thinner too, sunken cheeks, yellow teeth, coat stained with tobacco and whiskey, and the kind of rot that comes from the inside. But his eyes were the same, small and sharp and hungry, the eyes of a man who measured everything by what he could sell it for. Nell's needles stopped. Ruth looked up from the counter. Vernon took off his hat, smiled wide. "Miss Adler, pardon the intrusion. I'm looking for my sister." "Stepsister," Nell said. She didn't look up from the fabric. Vernon's smile twitched. "Family's family, Nellie." "Don't call me that." He stepped closer. Ruth set her scissors down and moved around the counter, positioning herself between Vernon and the back table without saying a word. "I heard you were here," Vernon said, peering past Ruth. "Came all the way from Helena. You got folks worried sick." "What folks?" "Well, me for one." Nell looked up now, met his eyes. "You sold me, Vernon." The shop went quiet. Ruth didn't move. Vernon's smile dropped like a mask he forgot to hold. "I didn't sell you." His voice went low, careful. "I made an arrangement, a legal one, for your own good." "You signed a paper giving Judge Crane rights over my body and my labor because you lost $200 at a card table. Don't stand in front of me and call that my own good." Vernon's jaw worked. He glanced at Ruth, then back at Nell. "This ain't the place for this conversation." "This is exactly the place. You wanted to find me? You found me. Now say what you came to say." He straightened up, pulled something from his coat, a folded paper, creased and dirty. "Crane sent me. Says you owe the remainder of the contract. Says if you come back willingly, he'll reduce the term. 6 months instead of 2 years. 6 months of what?" Vernon didn't answer. "Of what, Vernon?" "Of service. Household work. Same as before." Nell stood. The chair scraped behind her. "I was tied to a post in a horse stall for 11 days. I had no shoes. I had no water some days. He came to my room at night and stood in the doorway watching me sleep. Is that the household work you mean?" Vernon's face shifted. For half a second, something cracked behind his eyes. Guilt, maybe, or the shadow of it. Then it was gone. "You always did exaggerate," he said. Ruth spoke. "Get out of my shop." Vernon looked at her. "Ma'am, this is a family matter. Get out of my shop or I'll put these scissors through your hand and call it a sewing accident." Vernon stared at Ruth, then at Nell, then at the scissors in Ruth's hand, which she was holding like she'd done this before. He put his hat back on. "This ain't over, Nellie. Crane's got papers. He's got the law. And you ain't got nothing but a broken-down rancher and an old woman with a needle." He walked out. The bell screamed behind him. Nell's hands were shaking. She pressed them against the table and leaned forward, breathing hard. Ruth came to her side. Didn't touch her, just stood close. "Sit down." "I can't." "Sit down, girl." Nell sat. Ruth poured water from a clay pitcher and set it in front of her. Nell drank. Her throat was so tight she nearly choked on it. "That's your stepbrother?" Ruth asked. "That's the man who sold me for a card game." Ruth nodded, picked up her scissors, went back to the counter. "Then we'd better make sure he don't get a chance to do it again." Nell looked at her. "How?" Ruth didn't answer. She just started cutting fabric, steady and precise, like the world hadn't just walked through her door and spat on the floor. Nell rode home on the back of a mule Ruth lent her. She didn't wait for Silas, didn't want to. She needed the road, needed the rhythm of hooves on dirt, needed to feel her own body moving through space without anyone deciding the direction. When she got to the ranch, Silas was on the porch, mending a bridle. He saw her face and set the leather down. "Vernon's here," she said before he could ask. Silas went still. "Crane sent him. He's got a new contract. Wants me to come back. 6 months of service." "You going?" The question hit her like cold water. "What?" "I asked if you're going." "No, I'm not going. Why would you even—" "Because I ain't your keeper, Nell. If you wanted to go, I'd drive you there myself and hate every mile of it. But I wouldn't stop you." She stared at him. Then she climbed down from the mule and walked straight to him, stood at the bottom of the porch steps, looking up. "I'm not going back. Not to Vernon, not to Crane, not to any man who thinks he can write my name on a piece of paper and call it a deal." Her voice broke on the last word, but she held it. "I'm staying, not because you told me I could, because I'm telling you I am." Silas looked at her for a long time. Then he nodded once and picked up the bridle again. "All right then. That's all you got?" "What do you want me to say?" "I don't know. Something." He threaded the leather through the buckle. "I'm glad." She blinked. "You're glad?" "That's what I said." She stood there another moment, then shook her head and walked inside. Behind her, she almost didn't hear it, but she did. Silas exhaled, long and slow. The kind of breath a man lets out when something he's been holding finally lets go. That night, she wrote. More pages, more names, more dates. She wrote about Vernon, where he gambled, who he owed, how he'd come to her boarding house in Helena with 2 strangers and told her she was going on a trip. She wrote about the wagon ride, about the first night at Crane's house, when she still thought she might be treated fairly, about the moment she realized she wouldn't. She wrote about the stall, about the rope, about the way heat bends time and makes hours feel like years. She wrote until her hand cramped and the candle guttered and the pages covered the table like fallen leaves. Then she gathered them, folded them, and slid them into the flour tin at the back of the pantry. If Crane came for her, he wouldn't find words. He'd find flour. The next morning, Tom Birch came riding up before breakfast. Silas was chopping wood. Nell was inside boiling coffee. Tom pulled up hard, horse-lathered, breathing fast. "Mr. Calloway, we got a problem." Another one. "Crane filed papers at the courthouse yesterday. He's claiming theft of property. Says you took Nell by force and you're holding her against her will. He wants the sheriff from Fort Benton to come enforce the contract." Silas set the axe down. "Fort Benton's 6 days' ride. He already sent the letter, week ago. Sheriff's probably halfway here." Nell came to the doorway. She'd heard everything. "He planned this," she said. "Vernon showing up, The new contract? That was just a show. He already had the sheriff coming. Tom nodded. Judge Crane don't move unless he's 3 steps ahead. Silas looked at the road, then at Nell, then at Tom. What's the sheriff's name? Coulter. Samuel Coulter. He honest? Tom hesitated. He follows the law, and right now the law's on paper, and the paper says Nell belongs to Crane. Nell gripped the doorframe. I'm not going to let some sheriff I've never met drag me back to that barn. He won't, Silas said. You don't know that. I know that if he tries, he'll have to go through me, and I ain't easy to move. Silas, you can't fight the law with a bad shoulder and a fence hammer. I ain't planning to fight anybody. I'm planning to show him something the law can't argue with. He turned to Nell. Your pages, the ones you've been writing, how many you got? 16, front and back. Every date, every name, everything I could remember. Silas nodded. Then he turned to Tom. I need you to do something for me, and I need you to not ask why. Tom straightened. Yes, sir. Ride to Crane's house tonight, after dark. There's a study on the 2nd floor, east side. Nell kept a journal, leather-bound, small, about the size of a hymn book. Crane took it from her when she arrived. If it's still there, I need it. Tom's face went pale. You're asking me to break into the judge's house? I'm asking you to take back something that was stolen. Sir, if he catches me, he won't. But if he does, then you ride away and you forget we ever had this conversation. I won't blame you. Tom looked at Nell. She looked back at him. Neither of them said a word, but something passed between them. The kind of understanding that doesn't need language. 2 young people who knew what it felt like to be powerless and were choosing, in this moment, not to be. I'll go, Tom said. Tom, Nell started. I said I'll go, ma'am. He tightened his grip on the reins. My mama was a washerwoman. Worked for a man like Crane in Bozeman. Worked until her hands bled, and he paid her half what he owed and called it generous. She died still owing him money. I was 12. He looked at Silas. I ain't doing this for you. I'm doing this for her. He turned the horse and rode. Nell watched him go. Her throat was tight. She couldn't speak. Silas put his hand on the porch railing. He's a good kid. He's 19 years old, and you just sent him into a rattlesnake's den. I gave him a choice. He made it. And if Crane catches him? Silas didn't answer. Because they both knew the answer, and saying it out loud wouldn't make it any less true. That night, Nell couldn't sleep. She sat at the table with the candle out, listening to every sound. Wind, crickets, the creak of the cabin settling. She strained for hoofbeats, for a shout, for the crack of a rifle. Nothing came. Silas sat on the porch, same as every night, watching the dark. But tonight his hand rested on the rifle across his knees. Not pointed at anything, just there. At 3 a.m, hooves, fast, coming from the east. Nell was at the window before Silas was off the porch. They both watched as a single rider broke through the tree line, hunched low over the saddle. Tom Birch. He pulled up at the porch, panting. His shirt was torn at the shoulder. There was a scratch across his cheek, bleeding thin. I got it, he said, and held up a small leather-bound book. And something else. He reached into his coat and pulled out a second piece of paper. Found this in Crane's desk drawer. Open. Read it. Silas took it to the lantern. Nell stood behind him, reading over his shoulder. It was a letter, written in Crane's own hand, addressed to Vernon Sheridan, dated 3 months ago, before Nell ever arrived in Copper Bluff. Bring the girl, it read. I'll pay $50 upon delivery, and forgive the remainder of your debt. She must come willing, or at least appear to. If she resists, restrain her quietly. I don't want attention. Once she's here, I'll handle the rest. Destroy this letter. Vernon hadn't destroyed it. Vernon was the kind of man who kept ammunition, even when he didn't know who to point it at. Nell read it twice. Her hands were trembling, not from fear this time, from something hotter. "He bought me," she whispered. $50. He paid my stepbrother $50 to deliver me, like a package. Silas folded the letter carefully, and he put it in writing. He told the town I was a debtor, told them I was a thief, told them I came willingly. Her voice was rising now, raw. He lied about every piece of it, and they believed him, because he's the judge and I'm nobody. You ain't nobody. I'm a woman with no shoes and no name and a stepbrother who sold me for less than a horse. She slammed her hand on the table. $50, Silas. That's what he thought I was worth. That's what he paid. It ain't what you're worth. She looked at him. Tears she hadn't cried in weeks were gathering behind her eyes, hot and furious and stubborn. I want to burn his house down, she said. I know. I want to stand in front of this whole town and read this letter out loud and watch them choke on it. I know that too. So why are you so calm? Silas set the letter on the table beside the journal. Because anger's a fire, Nell, and fire's only useful if you know what you're burning. She stared at him. Then slowly, like a wave pulling back from shore, she sat down. Her hands went flat on the table. Her breathing slowed. The sheriff's coming, she said. He is. And when he gets here, Crane's going to show him the contract and tell him I'm property. He is. So we show him this. She touched the letter. And my journal. And the pages I wrote. And we let the truth do what truth does. Which is what? Nell looked at the candle flame. Make powerful men uncomfortable. For the first time since she'd arrived at this ranch, barefoot and bleeding and refusing to beg, something crossed her face that wasn't fear or anger or defiance. It was resolve. The quiet, dangerous kind. The kind that doesn't announce itself. The kind that waits. Tom cleared his throat from the doorway. Ma'am, there's one more thing. Nell turned. When I was leaving Crane's house, I heard him talking to Deputy Teague in the parlor. I couldn't hear everything, but I heard one thing clear. Tom swallowed. He said, if the sheriff won't take her, we do it ourselves. Quiet. Before Sunday. The room went cold. Nell looked at Silas. Silas looked at the rifle. How many days till Sunday? Nell asked. Tom's voice was barely a whisper. 2. Nell pressed her palms against the table, felt the grain of the wood, felt the pages beneath her hands, the letter, the journal, the proof of every lie Emmett Crane had ever told. She looked at Silas. He looked back. Neither of them spoke, but when he reached across the table and covered her hand with his, she didn't pull away. She held on. And in the silence of that cabin, with the candle burning low and the darkness pressing in from every side, something shifted. Not between them, inside them. A decision being made. Not to run. Not to hide. Not to wait for someone else to come and make things right. To stand. To stay. To fight with everything they had, even if everything they had was a stack of handwritten pages and a stolen letter, and the stubborn refusal to disappear. Outside, the night was deep and black and full of teeth. But inside, the fire held. Saturday came like a held breath. Nell was up before the sun. She hadn't slept. She'd spent the night at the table organizing her pages. 16 sheets, front and back, every date, every name, every bruise accounted for. The journal Tom had stolen sat beside them, leather cracked, pages warped from heat and neglect. And the letter. Crane's letter to Vernon. The $50 confession. She stacked them together, tied them with a piece of twine, and pressed her hand flat on top like she was swearing an oath. Silas came inside. He'd been in the barn since 4, checking the rifle, cleaning it, loading it, setting it by the door. Not to use, to have. "You eat?" he asked. "Can't." "You need to." "I need to think." He set bread and dried meat on the table beside her stack of papers. She looked at it, then at him. "If this doesn't work, Silas, if the sheriff reads all of this and still sides with Crane, then we figure the next thing. There might not be a next thing. There's always a next thing, long as you're breathing." She picked up the bread, took a bite, chewed without tasting. Tom arrived an hour later. He'd ridden all night to Fort Benton and back, pushing the chestnut mare harder than he should have. His eyes were bloodshot, his coat dusty, his face tight with something Nell couldn't read. "I found the sheriff," Tom said from the saddle. Silas stepped off the porch. "And?" "He's coming, already on the road. He'll be here by midday." "You talked to him?" "I tried. He's a quiet man, hard to read. But I told him there were things in Copper Bluff that didn't match the papers he'd been sent. He listened. Didn't say much, just said he'd see for himself." Nell came to the doorway. "Did Crane send him the contract?" "Contract and an affidavit, signed by Deputy Teague, saying you fled voluntarily and Mr. Calloway took you by deception." "Teague's lying." "I know that. You know that. Question is whether Sheriff Coulter knows that." Silas looked at the road. "Guess we'll find out." They rode into town together, all 3 of them. Silas drove the wagon, with Nell beside him. Tom rode alongside on the mare. Nell held the bundle of papers in her lap, gripping it with both hands like it was the only thing keeping her attached to the earth. Copper Bluff was buzzing when they arrived. Word had spread the way word always spreads in small towns. Fast, distorted, and hungry. Folks lined the boardwalks, not quite gathered, not quite scattered. The kind of crowd that pretends it's just passing through, while planting its feet. Silas pulled the wagon up in front of the courthouse. It was a wooden building, 2 stories, the only structure in town with a real painted sign. Judge Emmett Crane's name was on it. Twice. "Silas," Nell's voice was low. "He owns this building." "I know." "We're walking into his house and asking his furniture to judge him." "We're walking in with the truth. Furniture don't matter." She almost laughed. Almost. Then she climbed down from the wagon and stood on the street with the papers against her chest. The front door of the courthouse opened. Deputy Walt Teague stepped out, badge catching the light, sweat already staining his collar. He looked at Silas, then at Nell, then at Tom, and his face did something complicated, a mix of pity and self-preservation that made Nell's stomach turn. "Calloway," Teague said. "Sheriff Coulter's inside. Judge Crane requested a formal hearing." "I bet he did." "This is a legal proceeding. You'll want to mind your tone." Silas stepped up onto the boardwalk, stood close enough that Teague had to lean back. "Walt, you signed a paper saying I took this woman by deception." Teague's eyes darted. "I signed what the judge asked me to sign." "That's what I figured." Silas walked past him and pushed through the door. Inside, the room was arranged like a courtroom, though it served as the town hall most days. Chairs in rows, a desk at the front, an American flag in the corner that needed washing. Judge Emmett Crane sat behind the desk like he'd been born there. Silver hair combed back, coat buttoned to the throat, cane resting against his knee. He looked at Nell the way a man looks at a horse he expects to break. Beside him, in a chair pulled too close to the desk, sat Vernon Sheridan. He was picking at his fingernails and not looking at anyone. At a separate table to the right sat a man Nell had never seen. Tall, weathered, gray mustache, badge pinned to a leather vest. Sheriff Samuel Coulter. He had a ledger open in front of him and a pen in his hand, and his eyes moved between Crane and the doorway with the patience of a man who'd sat through 100 of these and trusted none of them. Crane smiled. "Silas, glad you could make it. And Miss Sheridan, welcome back." Nell didn't respond. She walked to the front of the room, stood before the sheriff's table, and set her bundle of papers down. "My name is Nell Sheridan," she said, "and I'm here to tell you what happened to me." Crane leaned back. "Sheriff, this woman is under a binding labor contract, signed by her legal guardian." "Stepbrother," Nell said. "Signed by her family representative, transferring rights of labor to me in exchange for debt settlement. She fled my property, was taken in by Mr. Calloway, and has refused to fulfill her legal obligation. I'm requesting enforcement." Coulter looked at Crane, then at Nell. "Miss Sheridan, you got something to say?" "I got 32 pages of something to say." Crane's smile flickered. Nell untied the twine. She spread the pages on the table, her handwritten account. Every date, every detail. 3 months ago, my stepbrother Vernon Sheridan signed a paper he had no right to sign. He owed Judge Crane $200 in gambling debts. Instead of paying, he sold my labor. He didn't ask me, he didn't tell me. 2 men came to my boarding house in Helena, put me in a wagon, and brought me here. Vernon shifted in his seat. "That ain't—" "Shut up, Vernon." The room went quiet. Vernon shut up. "For the first week, I cooked and cleaned. Judge Crane was polite. Then he started coming to my room at night, standing in the doorway, watching me." Crane's voice was smooth as glass. "That is a baseless accusation." "I ran. His men caught me 3 miles out. After that, he put me in a horse stall, tied my wrists to a post with braided rope. No shoes, no water some days. 11 days. Coulter was writing. His pen hadn't stopped. "Silas Calloway came to buy a horse. He found me instead. He cut me loose. That's the truth of it, every word. And I've written it all down." She pushed the pages toward Coulter. He took them, read the first page, turned to the second. His expression didn't change, but his pen stopped. Crane stood. "Sheriff, these are the ramblings of a disturbed young woman. I have a signed contract. I'm not finished." Nell reached into the bundle and pulled out the journal. "This is mine, my journal. I kept it since I was 16. Dates, places, names. Judge Crane took it from me the day I arrived. It was recovered from his study." Crane's composure cracked. A hairline fracture, but it was there. "That was taken from my private property. However she got it, it's stolen. You stole it from me first. I confiscated it. You confiscated a woman's diary and locked her in a barn. Does that sound like care to you, Sheriff?" Coulter looked at Crane, didn't speak, just looked. The kind of look that makes guilty men start talking too much. Crane obliged. "This girl is manipulative. She's turned Calloway against me. She's corrupted a young ranch hand into breaking into my home. She is exactly the kind of—" "One more thing," Nell said. She pulled out the letter. The room held its breath. "This was found in Judge Crane's desk, written in his own hand, addressed to my stepbrother. She didn't read it. She handed it to Coulter. Coulter read it, slowly. His mustache twitched. Then he read it again. "Bring the girl," Coulter read aloud. "I'll pay $50 upon delivery and forgive the remainder of your debt. She must come willing, or at least appear to. If she resists, restrain her quietly." He set the letter down. "Destroy this letter." Vernon went white. Crane didn't move. Not a muscle, not a breath. "Judge Crane," Coulter said. "This your handwriting?" "That document was illegally obtained. I asked if it's your handwriting." Silence. The whole room leaning forward. "I want a lawyer," Crane said. "You are a lawyer," Coulter closed his ledger. "And a judge, and apparently a man who buys women for $50 and calls it a labor contract." The crowd behind them rustled. Nell heard whispers, gasps. She didn't turn around. Crane's mask came off. Not all at once, piece by piece, like paint peeling in the sun. His smile vanished. His chin dropped. His eyes went hard and small. "You don't know what you're doing," Crane said to Coulter. "I built this town. I own half the land you're standing on. You think one girl's sob story is going to—" "It ain't a sob story," Ruth Adler's voice cut from the back of the room. Everyone turned. Ruth stood in the aisle, shawl over her shoulders, spine straight as a rail. "I saw him drag that girl through town 3 months ago. Middle of the day. She was crying. He had her by the arm. I watched him take her into that barn, and I heard the bolt slide shut from the outside." Crane pointed at her. "That woman has a grudge against me." "I watched," Ruth repeated louder, "and I said nothing. And that's been sitting on my chest like a stone ever since. So I'm saying it now." Another voice. Mrs. Norming from the bakery. She stood, hands clasped in front of her. "I saw bruises on that girl's wrists when she first came to town. I didn't ask. I should have." Then Henry Potts from the general store. "He offered me $20 to say I saw Calloway force the girl into his wagon. I didn't take it, but I didn't report it either." One by one, voice after voice, not a flood, a trickle that became a stream. People who'd seen things, heard things, suspected things, and looked away because Emmett Crane was the judge, and the judge was the law. And the law was the only thing standing between their small lives and chaos. But now, chaos had a name, and her name was Nell. Crane looked around the room. For the first time, nobody looked back at him with deference. Nobody nodded. Nobody stepped forward to defend him. He was alone. Vernon tried to stand. "I can explain." "Sit down, Vernon," Coulter said. He didn't raise his voice. Didn't need to. Vernon sat. Coulter stood, straightened his vest. "Judge Crane, I'm placing you under arrest on suspicion of unlawful imprisonment, fraud, and conspiracy to traffic in persons. Deputy Teague?" He looked at the deputy, who was pressed against the wall like he was trying to disappear through it. "You're suspended pending investigation. I'll be recommending charges for filing a false affidavit." Teague's badge hand trembled. He unpinned it without a word and set it on the nearest chair. Crane laughed, a short, bitter sound. "You think this sticks? You think any court in Montana Territory is going to take the word of a vagrant girl over mine?" Nell stepped forward, close enough that Crane had to look up at her from his chair. Close enough that he could see the scar on her wrist where his rope had cut. "I'm not a vagrant," she said. "I'm not a debtor. I'm not property. And I'm not the girl you tied to a post and thought would disappear. My name is Nell Sheridan. My father was a miner. He taught me to read, and he taught me to write, and he told me that the only thing a person truly owns is their word. So here's mine." She leaned closer. I will follow this to every court, every office, every newspaper in the territory. I will tell my story so many times that your name and the word criminal will be the same sentence. And I will do it standing up, in my own boots, with my own voice. Not because someone rescued me, because I rescued myself." Crane stared at her. His mouth opened. Nothing came out. Coulter took his arm. "Judge, let's go." Crane stood. For one moment, he looked at Silas, who'd been standing at the back of the room the whole time, arms folded, saying nothing. "You did this," Crane said. Silas shook his head. "She did." Coulter led Crane out. The door closed behind them. The room erupted. Voices, movement, the sound of a town exhaling something it had been holding for years. Vernon tried to slip out the side door. Tom Birch was already there, blocking it, arms crossed. "Going somewhere?" Tom asked. Vernon looked at him, at Nell, at the room full of people who were finally looking at each other instead of looking away. "I didn't know," Vernon whispered. "I didn't know what he'd do to her." Nell walked to him, stood in front of the man who'd sold her for $50 and a clear debt. She studied his face, the hollow cheeks, the yellow teeth, the eyes that couldn't hold hers. "Yes, you did," she said. Vernon crumbled, not dramatically, just a slow folding like wet paper. He sat down on the floor and put his head in his hands. Nell turned away from him. She was done. She walked out of the courthouse into the sun. The heat hit her full in the face. The street was full of people, more than she'd ever seen in Copper Bluff, standing in clusters, talking, pointing, trying to make sense of what had just happened inside those walls. Silas was behind her, then beside her. "You all right?" he asked. She took a breath, let it out. "No." "Yeah." "But I'm standing." "Yeah, you are." Ruth Adler appeared beside them, shawl draped over one arm, scissors still in her apron pocket. She looked at Nell with those sharp gray eyes. "You did good in there, girl." "I was terrified. That's what good looks like most of the time." Ruth reached into her pocket and pulled out a small brass key. She held it out. "My shop's got a back room. It ain't much. Cot, a basin, a window that sticks, but it's got a lock on the door, and the key's yours." Nell looked at the key, then at Ruth. "Why?" "Because every woman needs a room she can lock from the inside. Somebody told me that once." Ruth glanced at Silas. "Or something like it." Nell took the key, closed her fist around it. The metal was warm from Ruth's hand. "Thank you," she said. Ruth nodded once and walked back to her shop. Nell stood there, key in one hand, the other hand hanging at her side. People were still watching, still whispering, but the whispers had changed. She could feel it, the shift. Not acceptance, not yet, but curiosity, the beginning of respect. Tom came out of the courthouse, leading Vernon by the arm. Vernon walked with his head down. Tom walked with his head up. They passed Nell without stopping. Tom tipped his hat to her as he went. She watched them go, watched Vernon shrink down the street until he was just a shape, then a shadow, then nothing. "Nell!" She turned. Silas was standing by the wagon. He hadn't moved, hadn't followed, just waited. "You need a ride home?" he asked. She looked at the key in her hand, then at the road that led to the ranch, then at Ruth's shop behind her, where the little back room and the cot and the window that stuck and the lock on the door. "I think," she said slowly, "I need to figure out what home means first." Silas nodded. No hurt on his face, no disappointment, just understanding. The kind that comes from a man who'd already lost everything once and learned that holding on too tight, is just another way of letting go. "Door's open," he said, "whenever you want it." She walked to him, stood close enough to see the lines around his eyes, and the gray in his stubble, and the place on his collar where his wife's hat had worn the fabric thin. "Silas Calloway," she said, "you are the most stubborn, quiet, impossible man I have ever met." "I've been told." "And you saved my life." "No, ma'am. You saved your own. I just handed you a cup of coffee." She laughed. A real one. The first one he'd heard from her. It cracked something open in the air between them, something that had been sealed shut since the day he'd cut her loose in that barn. She reached out and touched the brim of his hat, his wife's hat, gently, the way you touch something sacred. "She had good taste," Nell said. She did. Nell stepped back, looked at him one more time. Then she turned and walked down the boardwalk toward Ruth Adler's shop, key in her hand, boots on her feet, head high. Silas watched her go, every step. He didn't call after her, didn't wave, just watched until she opened the door and disappeared inside, and the bell above it rang one last time. Then he climbed up onto the wagon, took the reins, and sat there for a moment, looking at the empty seat beside him. He tipped his hat to no one in particular, clicked his tongue, and drove home alone. But the seat beside him didn't feel empty anymore. It felt like a promise, the kind that doesn't need words. Nell slept in Ruth Adler's back room that first night, with the key turned twice in the lock and her hand still wrapped around it when morning came. She woke to the sound of Ruth's scissors cutting fabric on the other side of the wall. Steady, rhythmic. The sound of a woman who'd been working since before the sun had an opinion about it. Nell got up, splashed water on her face, pulled her hair back, and opened the door. Ruth didn't look up. "There's coffee on the stove. Don't let it burn." "Yes, ma'am." "And don't call me ma'am. Makes me feel dead." Nell poured coffee, drank it standing up, set the cup down and sat at the back table where her needle and thread were waiting, exactly where she'd left them. She worked. That was the first day. The second day, a woman came into the shop. Mrs. Callahan, rancher's wife, wide hips, tight mouth, the kind of woman who carried her opinions like ammunition. She set a pile of mending on the counter and looked past Ruth to where Nell sat stitching. "That her?" Mrs. Callahan asked, not bothering to whisper. "That's my employee," Ruth said. "I heard what happened at the courthouse." "Then you heard more than most people say out loud." Mrs. Callahan studied Nell. Nell didn't stop sewing, didn't look up, just pulled the thread through and tied the knot and cut it clean. "She does good work?" Mrs. Callahan asked. "Best hands I've had in 20 years. Mrs. Callahan set her mending down. "I'll be back Tuesday." She left. The bell rang behind her. Ruth looked at Nell. Nell looked at Ruth. Neither of them smiled, but something passed between them that was better than a smile. Recognition. On the third day, Nell walked to the ranch. She didn't ride. She walked. 4 miles on a dirt road in borrowed boots with the morning heat already pressing down like a hand on her back. She needed to feel every step, needed to arrive on her own terms, under her own power, with no one carrying her. Silas was in the barn when she got there. She heard the hammer before she saw him. She stood in the doorway and watched him work, driving nails into a new beam, shoulders tight, sweat darkening his shirt. His bad arm hung lower than the other, but he swung the hammer with the good one like he was arguing with something only he could see. "You're going to split that board," she said. He stopped, turned, looked at her the way a man looks at water after crossing a desert. Not desperate, just grateful in a way that goes deeper than words. "Nell." "Silas." He set the hammer down. "You walk all the way here?" I did. Why? Because I wanted to. Because nobody told me to. Because my feet work and the road was there. He almost smiled. She almost let him. She stepped into the barn, looked around. The stall where Crane had kept her was gone, torn out, boards pulled, posts removed. In its place was the frame of something new. Walls going up. A window cut into the east side. "What are you building?" she asked. "A room." "For what?" He picked up a nail, rolled it between his fingers. "For whatever needs building." She ran her hand along the new frame. The wood was smooth, sanded clean. She pressed her palm flat against it and felt the grain. "You didn't have to do this." "I know." "I don't need you to build me a room, Silas." "I ain't building it for you. I'm building it because the barn needed fixing and I had lumber." She looked at him. He looked at the nail. "Liar," she said. "Yeah." They stood there in the barn, in the heat, in the smell of fresh-cut wood, and for the first time, the space between them didn't feel like distance. It felt like choice. "I got the key," Nell said, "to Ruth's back room. I've been staying there." "I know, Tom told me." "It's small. The window sticks. The cot's harder than your floor." "But it's yours." "It's mine." She said it slowly, tasting each word. "First thing that's been mine since my journal." Silas nodded. "Good." "Is it?" "You wanted a door you could lock from the inside. You got one." "I did," she paused. "But I walked 4 miles to stand in your barn this morning. So maybe a locked door ain't all I wanted." He looked at her then. Really looked. Not the way he'd looked at her that first day in the stall, with horror and pity and the reflex of a decent man. Not the way he'd looked at her the night she cooked cornbread and sat across the room, with careful distance and the fear of needing someone again. This was different. This was a man standing on the edge of something he thought he'd never reach, and realizing the ground was solid. "Nell." "Yeah?" "I ain't good at this." "At what?" "At wanting things. I stopped wanting things 3 years ago. Buried it with Margaret, and figured that was that." Margaret. The name hung in the air. That was her name? That was her name. "Tell me about her." He blinked. "What?" "Tell me about her. I'm wearing her boots. I've slept in her bed. I've cooked in her kitchen and sat in her chair and touched her sewing basket. The least I can do is know her name and what it meant." Silas set the nail down, leaned against the frame. It took him a long time to start, and when he did, his voice was rougher than she'd ever heard it. She was loud, laughed at everything. Couldn't cook worth a damn, but she'd try anyway, and burn it, and laugh about that too. She read books I couldn't understand and explained them to me like I was smart enough to get it. She sang when the pipes froze. She cried when the dog got sick. She told me I was the most stubborn man alive, and that was the best thing about me. He stopped. His jaw worked. She died in the spring. Fever took her in 4 days. I sat beside her the whole time, and she told me not to stop living just because she did. And I promised her I wouldn't. And then I did anyway. Nell didn't speak. She just stood there and let the words settle like dust after a storm. "Until you," he said. "Don't say that. I ain't saying you replaced her. Nobody replaces anybody. I'm saying you woke something up that I thought was dead. And I don't know what to do with it. You don't have to do anything with it." "I know. That's what makes it hard." She stepped closer, 1 step, enough to close the gap from polite to personal. "Silas, I didn't come here to be somebody's second chance. I came here because you're the first person who ever let me decide whether to stay or go, and meant it. That ain't romance. That's respect. And I've had so little of it in my life that when I finally got some, I walked 4 miles in the heat just to stand near it. His hand moved, not fast, not sure. He reached out and touched her wrist, the one with the rope scar, and ran his thumb over it gently, like he was reading something written in her skin. She didn't pull away. I ain't asking you to love me, she said. I'm asking you to let me stay close enough to figure out if I can. He nodded. I can do that. And I need you to know I come with things. Bad nights, bad dreams, days when I'll lock the door and not come out, days when I'll flinch if you move too fast. That ain't going away. I come with things too. A dead wife's hat, a bad shoulder, 3 years of silence I don't know how to break. We're a mess. We're a matched set. She laughed, short, sharp, surprised, and he smiled, a real smile, the first one she'd seen, and it changed his whole face. Made him look younger. Made him look like the man he'd been before grief had sanded him down to bone. That afternoon they worked together. She handed him nails. He drove them. She held the boards. He measured. They didn't talk much, but the silence between them had changed again. It wasn't the silence of two strangers circling each other. It was the silence of two people building something and agreeing, without words, on the shape of it. By evening, the room had walls. No door yet, no window glass, but walls. And a floor Nell had swept 3 times because she wanted it clean. She stood in the center and turned slowly, looking at each board like it was a sentence in a letter written just for her. It needs curtains, she said. It needs a roof. Roof first, then curtains. Deal. She walked to the cabin. He followed. She cooked dinner, beans, bacon, cornbread with honey. They ate across from each other at the table. She noticed his wife's shawl was still in the drawer where she'd placed it weeks ago. He noticed her journal pages were still in the flour tin. After supper, she sat by the fire. He sat in the chair by the window. The same positions they'd held that very first night when she was a stranger bleeding on his floor, and he was a ghost who'd forgotten how to haunt. Silas. Yeah? Ask me to stay. He looked at her. I thought you said you didn't need me to ask. I don't need you to. I want you to. He set his cup down, leaned forward, elbows on his knees. His eyes were clear and steady, and full of something that had been building since the day he'd knelt beside her in that barn. Nell Sheridan, will you stay? Is that a question or a request? It's whatever you need it to be. She stood, walked to him, stood over him the way she'd stood over Crane in the courthouse. But this time, her face wasn't hard. It was open, cracked wide open, like a door that had finally come off its hinges. It's a yes, she said. He reached up, took her hand. She let him. They stood like that for a long time, her hand in his thumb tracing circles on her palm, the fire popping behind them. Then she sat down beside him and leaned her head against his shoulder, and he rested his chin on her hair, and neither of them moved. A week later, Nell moved her things to the ranch. It wasn't much. A tin comb, a change of clothes Ruth had sewn for her journal pages, the brass key. She set the key on the shelf by the door, not because she didn't need it anymore, but because she wanted to see it every day. A reminder that she could leave, that staying was a choice she made each morning when she woke. She kept working at Ruth's shop, walked to town every day, walked back every evening. Silas offered the wagon. She said she liked the walk. He stopped offering. Tom Birch came by on Sundays. He'd bring news from town and stay for supper and leave before dark. The three of them sitting at the table, eating and talking about nothing in particular. Fence boards, weather, the price of oats. Normal things. Simple things. The kind of things people talk about when they've stopped fighting for survival and started building a life. One Sunday, Tom said, "Crane's trial is set for October. Fort Benton Circuit Court. Sheriff Coulter says they'll need your testimony, Miss Sheridan." Nell set her fork down. "I'll be there." "Both of you?" Silas looked at Nell. She looked back. "Both of us," Nell said. Tom nodded. Then he cleared his throat. "There's something else. Vernon's gone. Left town 3 days ago. Nobody knows where." Nell was quiet for a moment. She picked her fork back up. "Good." "You don't want to know where he went?" "No. I want to know he's gone. That's enough." That night, after Tom left and the dishes were done and the fire was low, Nell sat at the table and opened her journal. Not the old one Crane had taken, but a new one. Ruth had given it to her. Brown leather, blank pages, a clasp that clicked shut. She opened to the first page, picked up the pen. "What are you writing?" Silas asked from the chair. "The beginning." "Of what?" She looked at him. "Of what comes after." She wrote, not the dates and names and horrors of what had been done to her. She'd already written that story. 32 pages, front and back. It was finished. It would be told in court, read into record, preserved in ink. This was different. This was the morning she walked into Ruth's shop and was told her hands were alert. This was the night she cooked cornbread, and Silas nodded once, and it felt like a standing ovation. This was the afternoon she stood in a half-built room with no roof and turned in a slow circle and felt, for the first time in her life, that the ground beneath her feet was hers. She wrote until the candle burned low. Then she closed the journal, clicked the clasp, and set it on the shelf beside the brass key. "Come to bed," Silas said. Not a command, an invitation. She took his hand. They walked into the bedroom together. She pulled off her boots, Margaret's boots, her boots now, and set them by the bed. He hung his hat, Margaret's hat, his hat always, on the hook by the door. They lay beside each other in the dark, not touching, just close. Close enough to hear each other breathe. Close enough to know they weren't alone. "Silas." "Yeah?" "Thank you for not fixing me." "You weren't broken." "I was. But you let me put myself back together instead of doing it for me. That's the thing. That's the whole thing." He turned his head toward her. She turned hers toward him. In the dark, she couldn't see his face, but she could feel his breath warm on her forehead. "Margaret would have liked you," he said. "You think so?" "She liked stubborn women." "Takes one to know one." He laughed, low and quiet and rusty, like a gate opening for the first time in years. She pressed her forehead against his shoulder and smiled into the fabric of his shirt. Outside, the night settled over the ranch like a hand placed gently on a sleeping child. The gelding shifted in the barn. The crickets took up their chorus. The stars came out one at a time, unhurried, certain. In the morning, Nell would walk to town. She would sew. She would come home. She would write another page. And one day, not today, not tomorrow, but one day, she would stand in a courtroom in Fort Benton and tell her story to a judge who wasn't bought. She would say her name and mean it. She would hold up her scarred wrists and let them speak. And when it was over, she would walk out into the sun and down the steps and into a life that belonged to no one but her. But that was later. Tonight, she was here, in a bed that had belonged to a woman she never met but owed more than she could say. Beside a man who didn't ask her to be anything other than what she already was. And that was enough. Not the kind of enough that settles. The kind that builds. The kind that puts down roots and grows toward the light and refuses, absolutely refuses, to be pulled up by anyone else's hand. And reader, if you've ever been in a place so dark you forgot what your own name sounded like. If you've ever been told you weren't worth the ground you stood on. If you've ever let someone else write your story because you forgot you were holding the pen, then you already know what Nell Sheridan knew the morning she woke up in that cabin, with the sun coming through the window she'd hung curtains on with her own 2 hands. You know that freedom isn't something someone gives you. It's something you take back. 1 stitch at a time. 1 page at a time. 1 locked door at a time. And when you finally find the person who doesn't try to hold the pen for you, who just sits beside you and watches you write, you hold on to them. Not because you need them to survive, because you choose them. And that choice, that single, ordinary, earth-shaking choice, is the most powerful thing a human being can make. Nell Sheridan was sold for $50. She was tied to a post. She was broken down and dragged through the dirt and told she was nothing. But she stood up. She spoke. She stayed. And she was no one's property ever again.